Welcome to this very, very happy event. I'm so glad to see you here. Uh, my name is Rebecca Lemon, and I am the director of the Levan Institute, as well as a professor of English and Comparative Literature here at USC. Thank you so much for joining us today, wherever you may be. We're here to have a conversation about Ann Marie Yasin's new book, Rebuilding Histories in the Roman World, Architectural Restoration and Temporality from Augustus to Justinian, which just came out with Cambridge University Press in 2025. And for those of you who do not have the book yet, we were just talking with the commentators about its first beauty and also its sheer size. It's a very impressive accomplishment, and I'm so excited for us to talk about it. Ann Marie is professor of art history and classics here at USC. And so I'll just begin with a couple of comments. One is, I think many of you are admirably up on your Zoom etiquette in already having the camera. I usually need to begin with, if it would be really lovely if you turned on your camera, but kudos to this world of people who have already done that. It's just so nice to see your faces. And today we have the great good fortune to have two wonderful commentators joining us. One is Darlene Brooks Hedstrom, Associate Professor of Near Eastern and Judaic Studies and Classical Studies, as well as the Mira and Robert Kraft and Jacob Haidt Chair in Christian Studies at Brandeis University. And Felipe Rojas Silva, Associate Professor of Archaeology in the Ancient World and Egyptology and Assyriology at Brown University. We will also have the conversation moderated by our wonderful colleague, Fred Clark, Associate Professor of Classics and English here at USC. Today's conversation was organized in partnership with the Departments of Art History and Classics, so we thank them. Our program will start with a very short introduction to the book by Ann Marie. Then she will be in conversation with Professors Brooks Hedstrom and Rojas for roughly 30 to 35 minutes. At that time, we will open the floor to questions from everyone. You will be able to ask questions through the chat function or by raising your Zoom hand or just by waving wildly into the camera. There are lots of ways to get our attention. One thing that I have noticed in our book chat format is that over the course of what is bound to be a quite captivating discussion between the three interlocutors, it can be really tempting to take a little bit more of a passive role as audience members when the floor is opened up to you all. So I really want to invite you to formulate your questions or your thoughts and write them down as the conversation is happening, so that when the floor is open to you, you feel kind of excited and ready to join the conversation. My final comment is just a shout out to Zach, who really is responsible for all of the kind of organizational work and labor that goes into this event. So thank you. Shout out to Zach. And with that, I will open the floor to Ann Marie. Many congratulations on your wonderful book, and please tell us about it.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction and for this occasion. I am so grateful to the Levan Institute, to you, Rebecca, and to Zach for organizing this event, and of course to Dar, Felipe, and Fred for sharing their thoughts soon. It's really an honor and a pleasure to see you all in this audience, and thank you for spending part of your day, especially at this thick point in the semester and midterms and all of that. I'm very grateful. So I just wanted to give, I have a very short spiel about the book, just to give folks a little bit of a sense of where I was coming from with it. I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's hope that, let's see. It looks like I need to send a request. Okay, let's try.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm like talking into the mute. It's like,
That's okay.
So you should be able to share. It does say all participants can share.
It is showing it's not, it's acting a little funny. Let's see. It might, it's giving me I've never seen this before, an exclamation point in a triangle on the share screen. So let's see what happens when I hit the share button, because I don't know what I'm sharing because it's not showing me the normal things.
Okay, yeah, because we don't see anything yet.
Oy. Um, well, I don't want to delay us too much, so I don't think I will troubleshoot this. We might
Well,
get
if
through
you
it without
wanted to
getting
send it to me, I could try to do it myself, but or let's see. And I'm sure you're more skilled at this than I am.
Okay. It's okay. I'll do that maybe when we have a sort of switch of voices, but I want to be able to at least talk through where I'm coming from. So the project is really born, thank you, Rebecca. The project is really born out of two things. First, an endless fascination on my part with how individuals and communities work with, revise, and adapt their built environments to meet their needs. And second, I would say at the same time, um, it comes out of a dissatisfaction with how our architectural, and cultural histories have incorporated and thought about these interventions. So, in studies of ancient architecture and patronage, rebuilding, when discussed at all, tends to be lumped together with new construction. We see that in studies of building programs of particular emperors or periods, for example. Um, and even with there's a whole new sort of range of interest in diachronic histories that are told of about a building or a region or a part of a city over time. These kinds of building biographies that trace the alterations and interventions made to enduring structures across long swaths of time. Even in those, the focus tends to be the history of an individual building rather than, the Pantheon or the Parthenon or something like that, rather than on the underlying questions posed by architectural change itself. And that's what I'm after. That is the cultural values and mechanisms that give rise to it, the possibilities and opportunities that it offers, the forms it takes, and the effects those produce on those who view, use, and move around the building. But both rhetorically and either materially or spatially speaking, rebuilding operates quite differently and poses really different challenges and opportunities than new construction because it is always operating in response to earlier iterations of the building on the site. At least that's the way I think that we really need to think about rebuilding as in tension with or in collaboration with or in response to whatever was there before. Um, and here's where I will show some slides, and maybe I'll be able to bring them up in the Q&A just to give some examples from the book. One, for example, is of the theater in Leptis Magna in Libya, which has inscriptions all over various parts of the building, which are spanning over about 100 years, 90 to 100 years, that are echoing with literal quotations of copied language in some case, the initial building inscription that was set up to commemorate the erection of the building in the first place. So over those generations, the later restorers or interveners were very explicitly drawing connections to the initial iterations, but also doing different things and shape and sort of stepping off from that foundation. And I should also say here at this juncture that in comparison to modern restoration practices, those that we probably are most familiar with in our world today in the modern West, generally speaking, in comparison to that, the ancient Roman rebuilds did not set out to replicate the sorry. Oh, sorry. There was a chat thing. The Roman rebuilds didn't set out to replicate the ancient form, the original form of the initial structure. They generally played off of or strategically and selectively evoked earlier chapters of the building's history. And that balance, that kind of negotiation is what's really at the core of the book. So a rebuilding project is always fundamentally grappling with issues of time, reckoning with the past building on the site, both its physical fabric and its associations and histories, designing and rhetorically packaging the rebuild in ways that underscore continuity or affect change, or most often a kind of nuanced mix of both. And at a deeper, more fundamental level, wrestling with the desire for durability and endurance in the face of inevitability, the inevitability of loss and decay. So this book is about shining a light on and trying to come to terms with and to grips with some of those temporal questions in the particular cultural context of the Roman and late Roman empires. How time was perceived, coped with, and manipulated by adapting and reworking the built landscape, the built environment. And I'm particularly keen to think through ways that we can access and understand their sense of time and change of their built environment. In other words, not just the kind of chapters of the building or architectural histories that we can reconstruct from our external historian's perspective, but what windows we can prise open into how they viewed and understood architectural transformation. And, I think I'm pretty much at our time, but I wanted to just say that one of the things that I've, a couple words on how I've gone about approaching that, and what I see as what I came to learn about rebuilding in the course of working on this book is that, first of all, architectural rebuilding is thoroughly embedded in within cultural conventions, expectations, and institutions of patronage. That is very much in the service of the construction of real or aspirational lineages. That rebuilding also came to be seen as a virtue, especially but not exclusively an imperial virtue from Augustus on. This was then adopted by other elites and eventually church leaders as well. Rebuilding offers opportunities for shaping and modifying communal calendars and celebration cycles. And in turning to much of the book is focused on experiential dimensions of how the rebuilt structures themselves are shaping and affecting communities' senses of their own sense of temporality. And there I look at things like the placement of the inscriptions, the materiality of the substances that are used to contrast with what the building had been before, for example, and even the spatial dimensions of when things like doorways are closed off and how that changes the kind of kinetic experience of the moving through and circulating around the building. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm so much looking forward to your questions and thoughts from our responders. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I will start with some just brief remarks and then turn it to Felipe, and then we'll start with our conversation. So thank you for the introduction, and I'm really, really happy to be invited to talk about and be in conversation with you, Ann Marie, about this fabulous book. So just an overview. So the book Rebuilding Histories in the Roman World is an engaging and wide-ranging invitation to rethink how we approach buildings, roads, and records of epigraphic celebrations, a phrase that I just love from this book, of construction, whether newly designed or more often the restoration or expansion of existing buildings. We are asked to think about time, its passage, its damage, its future through the punctuation of construction to repair and restore. We learn how much the built environments throughout the empire, from the east to the west, were embedded in annual calendars, and just as we might celebrate the life of a saint, ancient peoples celebrated the lives of buildings. Like philosopher Sarah Ahmed's book on the ways in which we ignore the changing nature of things in their long lifespans, Ann Marie offers a new methodological approach to how we read ancient buildings, while also illustrating that the importance of remaking and celebrating repairs and modifications was a very essential element around the Mediterranean world from the imperial period through late antiquity. She persuasively outlines case studies spanning this diverse Roman East and West to demonstrate the very present nature of acts of construction and repair as expressions of philanthropic celebrations that reached into the daily lives of individuals.
Great. I also prepared we were told to prepare 1 to 2 sentences. I did about 10, like Darlene. So here it is. So I'm also very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about this wonderful book. And I want to call attention to 3 of its many virtues. The first and the most important is its timeliness, and I'll say more about that in a minute. The second is the clarity of its prose. This is an academic book, and it's intended specifically for academics, but it's lucid and it's happily free of many of the obscurities that often accumulate when discussing temporality, materiality, and especially their intersections and their tensions. The third, which Rebecca already mentioned, is its length. This is a long book. It's also full of detail and hard-won expertise. It's full of the expertise of a scholar who has spent a lot of time in and around Roman architecture and maybe also on it and in it and with it and by it. And you can tell that in every one of its pages. But back to the important issue of its timeliness, and this is a book partly about time. In a nutshell, Anne Marie's book is about Roman period manipulations of the experience of time as these were carried out through architecture. And in being this, it joins a loud and not always harmonious group of voices in archaeology, art history, anthropology, and other disciplines that have denounced how scholarship and academic practices have mostly failed to deal with a very obvious fact, a very in your face fact, which is this: most of the things around us, from computer screens to the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, are not instantaneous events. They last through time. And we ourselves are not instantaneous, but also last and linger, although much less so than most of the buildings and the landscapes we inhabit. Those differentials in permanence can and have been used by people to emphasize or to obscure connections between present and non-present times, both past and future. And the Romans did that. And this is sort of paradoxical. This book's main arguments are so compelling that they seem self-evident. But then one wonders, why had this book in this shape not been written before? Why would ancient architectural historians have valued the Parthenon or Hagia Sophia as if they had been paralyzed in some sort of mental amber upon initial completion? Um, and I think what's most important about this book is that it's an invitation to engage in more exciting, but also much more difficult and challenging architectural histories. So I'm very grateful that I got to read this.
Wonderful. Thank you thank you so much, both Darlene and Felipe, for your comments. And yeah, Anne Marie, so I invite the three of you to begin a conversation, yeah, on these themes.
Well, thank you, Fred, and thank you so much, Don Felipe. That's I'm a little overwhelmed with just the taking it all in. It feels um I'm very grateful for the close reading that you both have given it and your perspectives, and I value them immensely. I think I'm still processing, especially where we just ended up with Felipe's last point about the timeliness. When you first said timeliness, I didn't know where you were going to go. I didn't know what exactly you were referring to and meaning about that. And I'm still thinking about all the ways that we can take that notion of timeliness today, because it's certainly something that in the course of writing this book, which did take it's been something I've been thinking about for a long time of my life. The timeliness of different questions has even changed in the course of working on this book. And certainly where it ends up, for those of you who may have had a chance to read it, that the last chapter brings us up to the present, or partly to the present, with questions of displacement and people living in other spaces and other ways of thinking about architectural time, and adaptation, and how we study it, as well as sort of whose stories we tell and how we value them. And so that's part of what I was thinking about when you said timeliness initially, about the kind of urgency that I see. In this case, it's about the refugee crisis and the ongoing refugee crisis now, but what began as the refugees from the Syrian civil war, who kind of looking at the ways in which they are adapting to the spaces that they were moving into, some of which were ancient ruins. But I very much appreciate your notion of timeliness in terms of the kind of, I do feel like there's a many voices that are working, coming at these questions from multiple angles now, of questions of endurance, time, our material culture, our myths of that we kind of hold up oftentimes through the models we use in scholarship of something that is enduring or instantiated at any one kind of moment, without grappling with the the challenges to sort of think about change over time.
Well, I'd like to follow up with maybe asking one of the first questions, because one of the things that I think you do so elegantly throughout just all the chapters in the book as a whole is to really challenge many areas of our field to think about how we have had a very particular perspective on how to read buildings. And so as I was reflecting on each chapter going through, I was thinking about how this book has great potential for changing how we talk about buildings, remodeling activities, and I mean, just the compelling nature of all the examples that you pull together. And so it made me think about how your thought has changed, like as you've worked through this book and as it now exists of do you feel like now you see rebuilding activities everywhere that we have ignored? And then at the same time, how might you think about how this will change the field? Like, what are your expectations and your hopes for the fact that that we have sort of privileged one construction, initial construction, and then have neglected the long life history of buildings?
Thank you for that question. Those are big. Those are all both really big questions. Do I see rebuilding everywhere? Yes. Like, it's the kind of thing that I think I play a bit of a game in some of my classes with the students where we talk about, we read some kind of material culture theory that's very theory-y about the role of our material world around us and shaping ourselves and shaping our sense of as subjects, and how we are not only we think of ourselves as building things as a society or sometimes as individuals, but how we are also shaped by the world around us, in all kinds of ways, and that the kind of relationship between those two being made by and making are intersected. And in class, one of the things I have them do in terms of this question about the built environment is go off on campus and come back with 5 photos in 15 minutes of time in the built environment that they can see and perceive on their campus. And then we put them on screen, and it's amazing. It's great. Will have like rust stains down the side of a building. Other people will have graffiti. Other people have like the bolts where a bench used to be that's not there anymore, or a kind of orphaned plaque from a monument that's either gone or under wraps or whatever, or gum stuck on something, worn pathways on steps, all of these things. And it's so funny that after doing that in one class, they sort of come back and say, like, they're just seeing different things now. They're seeing like the different time scales between the trees and the like cracks and weeds and something that's newly, polished and fresh. Or so yes, I see them everywhere, but it's also the kind of thing that I think, like so much of what we study, that when you start looking for it, it really it's the end of a thread that just keeps going, and I do find endlessly fascinating, not only in antiquity but in other times and places as well. But they are in some ways related. I mean, I think I wanted to write a book that is very much historically grounded in the past, but that also, I mean, I think that what we see there is very directly relevant for us today, not only because of sometimes some kind of genealogies that the modern world has made, but also in terms of thinking about the differences, the important differences, like questions of patronage, which have some parallels, but are fundamentally different in some ways. Hopes for how to, how to change the field. You know, I I have a couple of immediate things that just like that come to my head when you pose that question, which I'm really very grateful for, and I want to sit with some more. But I first of all hope that we can continue to. This is not something. This is a path that has already been taken, and we're already kind of building this path. I think I just want it to be. I want to continue to be built, to think about the ways in which we, in the kinds of histories that we write and the monuments, not just the monuments that we privilege, but in the kind of moments of the monuments that we privilege, when we study them, when we teach them, when we think about them, when we restore them, when we go to visit them, that in and of itself is a value judgment, and it's usually one that flies under the radar. We're not conscious of it, but I guess I would hope, if I'm thinking about what I hope to accomplish, or I hope this book is contributing to, is more consciousness about, you know, why we study and present as academics or as teachers, why we present a certain monument at a particular time and not a different time, and what that choice is saying about how we are shaping a kind of priorities, and not only of which periods are more important, but also of how we understand the very questions of what architecture does when it lasts over time, or it's changed over time. So that's one thing I would say. I think I also, this is maybe a little more just straightforward and obvious, but I am really hoping that we can we can contribute to the trend with this book. We can contribute to the movement to create more dialogue across both discipline boundaries, as well as subdisciplines and like field divisions within boundaries. Because I think it's so often the case that we, like a study of somebody who works on imperial Rome and ends at Constantine, doesn't have contact with the discourses that are going on about buildings 100, 200 years later. Same can go for sort of east-west questions, et cetera. So I think that the ability to, and the desire to read across fields and to draw, be part of a conversation across both time periods as well as sort of geography divisions that we've created in the discipline is another thing that I would hope to be a part of.
Let me follow up with a question that I think closely relates to Darlene's, and also like hers kind of is looking forward. And my question has to do with I mean, this question can only be asked after somebody like you writes the book, that the book allows this question to happen, and it has to do with traditional forms of academic production. Towards the end of your book, you consider diachronic analyses of photographs as a possible way to explore somatic and other engagement with buildings, understood as processes rather than events. And I wonder, I really like to hear you talk about this. Are books and articles not woefully insufficient in writing about or discussing the sorts of material and temporal manipulations that your book is concerned with? I mean, is a book or an article kind of behind? It's kind of part of that structure that didn't let us think about buildings the way you're thinking about them. And in terms of this possibility of transgressing disciplines, I think that a lot of different thinkers, not necessarily in academia, have been much bolder in experimenting with explanatory possibilities of the sort you're interested in. And I'm thinking specifically about the experiments of the office forensic architecture in documenting crime through very, very detailed study of the material fabric of things. And it's funny, but now anyone who reads a newspaper like the New York Times is interacting with forms of digital documentation that were developed by forensic architecture. And so I guess my question is, what can we as architectural historians do methodologically to capture the sort of dynamism that you're talking about that our structures of academic production are not sufficient in capturing? Um, yeah, that's kind of my question.
Hmm. Really interesting question. I feel like this is something that I would want to crowdsource, honestly. Like I don't know that I have an answer to that myself because I don't have experience experimenting with the range of possibilities out there. I also at the same like the flip side of the coin for me is that I do feel so far now, like where I sit right now today, I feel very committed to the form of academic long form writing. Um, and for what the degree of granular detail it allows and requires. And I don't, maybe this isn't getting a question, but I find that um,
No, absolutely. I'm absolutely with you.
I
I also think that one of the great things about this book is that it's as long as it is and as rich as it is. And my question is not so much about the length, but about, I mean, I've thought about these things too, and sometimes I feel limited by the way we have to show them. But it's not
mm,
because it's long or short. It's rather because I think what you're doing has so much visual and material richness that even your description of the exercise in your class, I think that's where it should be going, like that we should be able to have much more manipulatable accounts of the buildings visually and much more it's not a word, but we should be able to experiment with the ancient buildings rather than just show them. We should be
yeah,
able to move them and modify them. And I was thinking, I mean, you guys are, or
yeah,
some of you are in LA, the sort of the Kara Walker weird reconfigured
yeah.
sculpt. I mean, that thing was done partly with a laser scan. And that's kind of what I'm trying to imagine with you. It's like I think it's so exciting because it's so rich that we should be able to move your buildings around and modify them ourselves. It's
Yeah.
kind of like what I'm getting at.
Yeah. No, so I think this is where like I feel very indebted to and I'm riding the it's not quite riding the coattails, it's like benefiting from the extensive work of people who've done a lot of like digital modeling and digital kind of 3D modeling and that kind of thing. So there are um not a ton in my book. There's more kind of behind the scenes, but I do have in the book itself a number of either screenshots or stills or images that I've was given permission to use from people who've done mock-ups of restored buildings that help us piece together different phases of decoration, et cetera, and kind of go into the but to your point, like in the form of a book, it's a very still static snapshot, really, like it's a screenshot of of a kind of technology that is much more dynamic and that certainly has different kinds of possibilities when we're looking at it like a 3D model of a restored building or a building that can, and there's all kinds of incredible sort of digital humanities applications that help us put back into or can help us envision, disparate fragments that we can put back into place, as it were, whether those are inscriptions or other parts of the building. So that is all really important and exciting work that I am not like literally don't have my fingers in those pies directly, but am so glad there are people doing that. And I definitely hope there's, you know, that the crowdsourcing of all the different kinds of possibilities out there will continue because it's really fantastic. All the ways that people are thinking about how to, as you put it in your earlier comments, this kind of um, you know, problem as archaeologists that we grapple with of both fragmentation and this, context and durability, endurance. Like how
Right.
do we, those are the sort of nexus of problems that are at stake here. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this really rich conversation. And I want to open it up to the floor. We've already got some questions in the chat. I was just struck, well, maybe one thing that I was really struck by, Anne Marie, was the notion of co-presence that you bring out in the introduction and how that really informs the book as a whole. And you talk about how this sort of the simultaneity of the old and the new and these structures kind of can challenge a lot of the sort of maybe traditional academic approaches that we adopt. So I wondered, yeah, if you had any quick thoughts where you open it up about kind of co-presence and how that informs your work.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So co-presence is um, the concept, not my concept, but a concept that I draw on and find very rich and sort of thought-provoking to try to come to terms with how one writes a history of anything, really, but in my case, material stuff that is not based, like, what are our options if we're not going to focus on a moment of production or a series of moments of production of different things and string them into a historical narrative? What other models do we work with? What are our options? And the idea of co-presence is to think through what problems are involved, what issues come to the surface, what questions are raised when you have something that's created at one part of time and continues and is there simultaneously as something that's created at a different point in time, blah, blah, and that at any point in any historical person's life, their universe around them is surrounded by time, objects and things and the material world around them that is of a heterogeneous mix of times. We are all living in things that are surrounding us, almost all of us. I think most of us are surrounded by things that are a mix of old and new and repaired and intervened on or recycled or whatever. So that's co-presence is, as in terms of how I find it useful to think with, is that it forces us to kind of contend with not just the thing in isolation, which we as scholars of the past tend to do, and we put things in, a museum case from this period and we label it from that point in time, but we have to try to do the work of imagining. Sometimes we can reconstruct, but other times we have to just trust that it's there, if we don't know the details, that it would have been cheek by jowl against other objects, materials, inscriptions, worlds that are older, different, more worn, etc., and how we then contextualize that multiplicity of ages. And whether that's in the chapter that focuses on roads, for example, that might be like grappling with potholes when you have thinking about how a understanding of a road that is new nevertheless is a patchwork that can also be taken kind of metaphorically to think about the patchwork of timed environments that we all live in.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, I already see. So we've got 3 questions. We've got about 20 minutes left for Q&A. I've already got 3 questions in the chat, and then I see some people raising their hands. So yeah. Also, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your physical hand or your Zoom hand.
I have to go to class soon, so can I ask my question? I wanted to know that it was a great book, Anne Marie. Congratulations. One thing that always puzzled me, and this has to do with community and inscriptions. Do you have any thoughts on why the res gestae, which you deal with in the book, are only found, that is, fragments of it, found in the province of Galatia? Nowhere else in the entire empire, except obviously in Rome, where he set it up in front of his mausoleum. But why only in Galatia? Have you ever thought of that? That's more of a spatial issue with temporal aspects to it. What's, in other words, differences in community reactions to or promotion of inscriptions?
Yeah, well, I think that the last part of your question, thank you for your question. And I think the last part of your question is a much, that opens things up broadly. Into the narrow specific question about the res gestae, my hunch is that it's less so much about epigraphic habits and patterns of inscriptions as rather than cult habits or cult practices around the cult of Roma and Augustus. So the location of the best preserved of the inscriptions is literally on the temple of Roma and Augustus in Ankara. The other inscriptions are also associated with sites that are we can
the city of Antioch and Apollonia,
right, that are associated with the cult of the emperor. So My hunch, even though, we don't know what we are missing, so there's always that question of arguments from silence, but there does seem to be something suspiciously kind of regional about the fact that we have the three attested cases, and they're all in one province, of that inscription, with the exception of the original in Rome. I think that has to be something about the way in which the memory of the practice of the veneration of the emperor is being carried out and understood by the communities of the priests and later communities. And the best preserved case of that temple in Ankara is particularly useful because it does continue. It's an inscription. So here it does get into a little bit of epigraphic habit or practice. They continue to expand on that inscription with later additions to, beyond the res gestae itself, with later benefactions inscribed on the surfaces of the temple. So it becomes that record of benefactions by the priestly community on the model of, or at least on the same material support as the record of Augustus's benefactions.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it has something to do perhaps with the fact that Galatia, the province which Augustus annexed after the death of King Amyntas, that they were in sort of competition with the senatorial province of Asia, that is all the cities, Pergamum, Ephesus, all along the west coast, which were wealthy and, of course, into the imperial cult. And a way to show something different and also to bind themselves more to Augustus, since he was the founder of this, and they had a strong Hellenistic monarchy before and a strong epigraphic tradition. And I'm thinking maybe that's it, something like that, but I don't have any conclusive evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And there is potentially a fly in the ointment, though, with an inscription that I don't believe has been published yet, but there's a fragment from Sardis that is, some scholars have considered possibly part of the res gestae, which would change things. But
okay, I'll talk about that with you later. I want to know about that. Okay, thanks.
Wonderful. Well, we have a couple questions in the chat too, and some people with raised hands. So maybe I'll just start with a question from Lisa Battelle, who asks in the chat, how far would your theory and approach stretch to consider Northern Europe, say the 6th century, a Neolithic burial mound, new grass covered and impossible to enter, presented in contemporary lit as a pagan sacral space, maybe as a burial, maybe as a portal to another world? Then an aggressive tribe of Christians decided to use it as a regnal capital, site of installing a king, of assemblies, temporary habitation. But the place name and lit continues to discuss the built mound as a historical structure from long ago. So yeah, kind of a question about where you would take how far you would take your approach into other contexts. Yeah.
No, totally. Thank you, Lisa. I mean, I would say like 100%. This is like this, the I think the questions that I'm trying to wrestle with in this book are not like there's no boundary on them, or I don't see a boundary on them, in the sense that the same set of questions and problems are raised exactly by that kind of example. And then the issue is then sort of what do we do with that? How do we what can we learn from sort of shifting our focus, and how do we responsibly, where's our ethical kind of responsibility to how we teach such places? So, if the question is that relevant in the purview, I think absolutely. It's not the area that I have expertise in directly, but I think that it very much speaks to that kind of history of that monument over large swaths of time, speaks to very much the same sorts of problems, though there will be some important differences. As far as I know, but again, I don't know this place, we don't have a reinvestment on an epigraphic level, and that we can kind of think about in terms of a writing practice, or maybe we have evidence for that. The evidentiary level will be very different in terms of the forms that it takes. But yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that is like, it's very exciting and interesting.
Wonderful. We also have a question from Hector about sort of the connection to conservation studies and traces. I don't know if you wanted to.
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure are you reading a question that I'm not seeing, or was that?
Oh, I'm happy to read it. Sorry. So this is a question from Hector.
Oh,
Your study crosses over many methodologies and attends so carefully to the trace behind evidence. He says you have a sharp eye for these traces. I think behind the importance of patronage, the ways in which you describe communities emerges from the interaction between trace and patronage. To what extent is the innovative viewer that you imagine a way of thinking about conservation studies? What extent is our ability to discern the communal in these traces a contribution to conservation studies?
I'm sorry. So I'm so bad at multitasking and like reading while I'm talking. So would you read that last part again,
Oh,
Fred?
no
Sorry
worries.
to interrupt
Sorry.
you. Just the very last phrase. I didn't catch
Yeah.
it.
To what extent is our ability to discern the communal in these
Oh, uh-huh.
traces a contribution to conservation studies?
Hmm. Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I'm coming from a class this morning, just right before this meeting, that's on histories and ethics of conservation. And I know, Hector, these are a class that you've yourself been doing too. So we're living this in the classroom. I I think that it is something that we are all, certainly my students are also very much picking up on the notion of expertise of both the of a conservator as well as the institutions that are kind of hiring them or commissioning the work done, and that role of the kind of discerning eye of deciding what time to restore something to, or what traces, or how to make legible changes over time is a disciplinary discussion within conservation circles themselves, but also can, but maybe doesn't do as much as it should to include the voices of communities who are using the buildings. I don't know if that's exactly what you're getting to, but that's where my head goes with that question. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think I was really kind of, I mean, it's such an innovative way of thinking about trace and community through this mediation of patronage. And you're able to cross, Byzantine studies and classical studies and archaeological studies and material culture. And I just wonder to what extent this kind of settles in the issues of conservation studies where the issues of community are so pronounced. Like, to whom do these things belong? How do they belong? If that helps to kind of frame these issues a bit more than the methodologies that the disciplines in some ways are so territorial about. And to get back to Felipe's question, like, why has this book not been written? You read it and it's like, yes, of course, but there's also a way in which it hasn't been written. And I'm just kind of also kind of thinking about that.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. Again, this is so many of these questions are so like, I really want to sit with them for a while and chew on them. So um, uh, this is not a complete answer by any means, but the one other additional response I would have to the way you're formulating that is that both disciplines, our disciplinary boundaries and conservation questions are really a product of our time, or 19th, 18th, 19th century to our time. And so when we have especially geographic divisions, or even divisions between early Christian architecture versus late antique architecture, and classical versus late antique, that um, those are shaped by our historical and political blah 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 histories. And I think something very similar, it must be said, is also going to be the result of, or resulting in, the conservation decision. So when you have, you know, we can see it really clearly in some places where you see shifts in conservation priorities. So, or preservation and display and excavation priorities even. So in a place like Rome, where you've got a not so new anymore Museum of the Crypta Balbi, which is dedicated to the presentation of post-classical chapters of the city, and in a site that was excavated and showcasing not only the Augustan chapter of the building that it's in, but revealing all the way up through medieval and early modern chapters of that building. Like, that set of priorities is a conservation question about not quite communities in the same way, but it's definitely thinking about the time horizons that the present community in in Italy and in Rome are valuing and presenting.
Wonderful. So we also have sort of a methodological question from Laura Novak, and this is about sort of your own writing of the book. What was your favorite part of writing this book? Perhaps something you really never knew before, and what did you need to leave out? Perhaps something you wish you could have included but didn't have room.
Oh my gosh, the cutting room floor question. Favorite part. Oh gosh. I find okay, my first response to this is one of the things I find so interesting was I had to write there's a lot of images and you have to do all of the kind of the permissions and the tables and all this stuff for the press to publish the images and to have all the copyright details sorted out and all of that. And I brought it on myself, but I found it as a matter of principle. I wanted, the press did not require this, but I wanted, whenever possible, the photographs to be dated because I thought my whole book is about change over time. And especially in archaeological sites, it really matters when the photograph is taken. But it's not always easy to find out. And I found, I don't know if I would say this is my favorite point, but it was very, there was a sweetness to it, I guess it's a way of putting it, then going like using my old photos, and some of them I deliberately chose photos that I took as an undergraduate, like studying abroad in Rome. There's a couple in here that like I scanned from slides of studying abroad in Rome because I was really interested in a way that the building, a particular site in the Roman Forum looked then that does look different now because it's been cleaned. But I needed to register that this is not the building of, 2025 as it appears now, or even of 2024 when I submitted the book, but that this is itself a historical photograph in a way. So there's like the ways in which it made me very self-conscious in both good and bad ways. So this is partly cutting room floor part two. It made me very self-conscious of my own biography and my own time and my own decay in relationship to these buildings and how they've changed over time.
No, we can all relate to that feeling of our own decay. I maybe we have time for one last question. I also wanted to make sure we got to Brandon, who has his hand up. Oops. Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I said, "Oh gosh, thank you, Ann Marie." I was actually just on the way out because I was like, "Oh, it's class," but I'll try to answer or ask this quickly, and I don't think your answer is going to be as quick. But anyway, I'd also like to ask you about something that you didn't do, um, particularly with regards to your methodology and your process, frankly. Which methodologically it is highly sophisticated and indeed enjoyable in that regard, and for all other reasons that have been stated. But I was curious in particular about your use of co-presence, right, as opposed to, say, for instance, the palimpsest. And you do make a point to gesture towards the palimpsest, and you sort of you do away with it. But I was curious as to A, was this something that you had started out with as an approach and then swiftly decided to abandon it because there are ways in which I see that it's totally wholly inadequate to the thing that you're trying to do. But at the same time, I was curious as to sort of when you realized that it was inadequate, but also what is it, in which ways precisely is it inadequate?
The palimpsest, you mean,
Yes,
as a
that
metaphor,
as a methodological framework for
Mhm.
what it is that you're trying to get at when you want us to look at buildings.
Mm. Um, yeah, I think I'll try to keep it brief. I think that I mean, palimpsest, I do use it from time to time, and it's kind of baked into how I think and talk about buildings. So I don't get away from it entirely, but I do think um, it's not as useful as I would want it to be because so a palimpsest is, it comes from manuscript studies, and Fred, like, it's ridiculous describing a palimpsest with you here on the screen. But in any case, I'll do my best. But coming from manuscript studies, we have a text that's written on a manuscript and that is later repurposed for another text. with the original text being basically erased but scraped off and reused. And then most of the time, as my understanding, that the palimpsests that we see, that's a product of what we can see, especially through digital manipulation of photographs, ultraviolet light, blah, blah, blah. So the palimpsest as a thing in manuscript studies and as a metaphor, where the metaphor for me breaks down is that the palimpsest is visible to us. It's not necessarily visible to them. And it, maybe you can see traces of it, whatever, but it wasn't intended to be visible to them. And so it's our way of being able to reconstruct the history of the use of this substrate that the 2 texts or 3 texts or however, the texts are written on and how they reused. So for me, the palimpsest part breaks down, or is at least an imperfect metaphor, because I really want to try to figure out and like think about how they, our historical actors, are like making choices, seeing things at the same time, contemporaneously, co-presences, deciding what to keep, what not to keep, how to blend or contrast what's new with what they saw as old. So they do have to be both visible, or they are making them both visible. Though there are certain cases, like there are some buildings that get overwritten, and we can excavate under and see the lower layers, and we can kind of rewrite those chapters. That's more like a palimpsest in the literal sense, I guess. But so many, and that's really important and interesting too, that those choices do happen. But many of the times you've got the selectivity of certain elements being kept and intentionally made visible, or kept to be visible, or reframed, or reconditioned by what is done around them that's new.
Yeah, it seemed to me that even the very idea of legibility and the fact that that literacy is so baked into that concept was something that you were just trying to kind of get out of like it in terms of a straitjacket. And it sounds like indeed that's precisely what it is you're talking about. No, it's really, really well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, wonderful. It's we're just about at 2 o'clock here, so I want to make sure we have time to get off to our next engagements. But congratulations, Ann Marie, on a truly wonderful work. Please join me in thanking Ann Marie and thanking our commentators, Dar and Felipe, as well. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you so
you.
much, everyone, for all your questions. I'm hoping that somebody on the other side of the screen will have a way of capturing what's in the chat, because I didn't have a chance to read it as we were going. I think there might be more questions, and I'm so grateful for your comments and thoughts, really, and your time, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Dar.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Felipe. Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Rebecca.